This is Terms of Reference Podcast number 171.
The way to think about it is that OTI is a contingency organization. We don't determine in advance what our activities are going to be. Most of foreign assistance does that, and for good reasons. Long-term development has long-term development standards, and they can plan far in advance. We don't do that. We act as we move, and we invent and innovate as we go forward. The key difference between OTI and, say, humanitarian assistance or long-term development assistance is we're a contingency office, and we embrace that. We embrace the unknown.
This is Terms of Reference. I'm your host, Stephen Lennon. For many years now, and honestly, it's just crazy that I can even say that about this podcast at this stage, I've been saying the social sector is filled with lots of very smart, well-educated people who truly want to lift up others in pursuit of greater human flourishing. Almost always, this is a fantastic thing. I mean, having intelligent, thoughtful people on your team is something we all wish for. But at the same time, something I've also noticed over my career is that when we create teams with many highly intelligent, ambitious, motivated people, those teams often miss the forest for the trees. Reports that could be 2 or 3 pages end up being 100-page tomes. People dive deep into their passion or niches and often have trouble seeing how their initiatives are interconnected with others. And as has been pointed out on this show so many times, we frequently forget to just listen to the very people and communities we're trying to serve. One area where this rings true is in the area of planning. We plan so we can measure. We plan so we can articulate the theory behind the change we expect to see. We plan because of budget cycles and resource allocations. We plan so much that sometimes, and no, I'm not kidding here, we forget to do. This is partially why phrases often associated with places like Silicon Valley, things like innovation, iteration, and fail fast, have become such buzzwords around the social sector. So, what if it was your job to lead a U.S. government agency that had to operate without a plan and literally embrace the unknown to achieve foreign policy objectives? For most of the people I know in our sector, this would be a highly undesirable position. Now, this isn't a value statement. This is just common sense. Most of us look for stability, predictability, and minimal risk in what is otherwise a very unique career choice. But for people like Stephen Lennon, my guest for the 171st Terms of Reference podcast, delivering positive outcomes in turbulent situations is a sweet spot. Stephen is the director of the Office of Transition Initiatives for the U.S. government. OTI helps local partners advance peace and democracy by providing fast, flexible, short-term assistance targeted at key political transition and stabilization needs. If you're like me, or really any shade of an Aidpreneur, you're going to love this conversation about how OTI operates, how they innovate on the fly in situations across the globe, and why sometimes not having a plan is the best plan of all. I spoke with Stephen in Washington, D.C. But before we get started, a quick word from our sponsor.
The Terms of Reference podcast is sponsored by International Solutions Group, helping to improve the social impact of governments, UN agencies, NGOs, and companies for more than 10 years. Visit ISG online at www.theisg.com.
Hello, Stephen. Thank you so much for being on the Terms of Reference podcast today.
Hey, nice to be here, Stephen. Thank you.
Stephen, where do we find you sitting today?
I'm in Washington, D.C. in the National Press Building.
Oh, that's nice. So it's the middle of August, so, I was in D.C. for a good 5 or 6 years of my life, so I imagine it's humid and muggy. Well, maybe not inside the building, but, it's late summer there.
Yeah, it's very steamy here. Definitely.
Awesome. Tell us about exactly what OTI does, in your words, and how you're engaging in the world.
Okay, so our vision statement, I'll just start with that, is to be the preeminent U.S. government response to complex political crises. There's a lot of thinking that goes into that one sentence. First of all, it has to be important to U.S. foreign policy, what we're doing. Secondly, it has to be overseas. That's implied. But then OTI, when we get involved in something, we bring an intellect and a capability that is, I believe, very unique in U.S. foreign assistance. And I hope to talk to you about that today, why it's so special. Now, I'm really a cheerleader for OTI, so I want to mention that at the very beginning of our talk, that I definitely have a parochial view and believe that OTI is the best part of U.S. foreign assistance, and I'd love to be questioned about that.
I love the challenge, right? So Can you give us just a hard and fast example of what exactly that means to be the preeminent foreign policy implementer, or to be the agency that you say is this fantastic agency? Like, what's an example of the work that you do?
So it's hard to roll it up, but we do about 2,000 different activities every single year in about 15 different places. And these are always contingency environments that U.S. foreign policy has not anticipated. So one hard example is there was a coup in Mali, and the U.S. government wanted the peace accords to be signed there and really was pushing it. And OTI was the implementing office that helped get that done. And one of the things we did many, many things, was we published all of the accords in all of the languages that are used in Mali, or most of the languages. And we published that, and then we disseminated it throughout the country. We also held rallies in support of those peace accords. We also sent Malian journalists to Algiers, where the peace accords were being negotiated, so that they could report back. Those are all 3 discrete activities among hundreds that we did to achieve the U.S. foreign policy of getting those accords signed. And they were signed. We were successful.
So how is that different, the way that you would approach it, or the mandate you receive, or just your insertion into that particular conversation, that situation that is different from, either another humanitarian actor or another development actor, because what I just heard you said, you translated, you trained, and you disseminated, right? So how is it that OTI's delivery is especially uniquely placed?
So the way to think about it is that OTI is a contingency organization. We don't determine in advance what our activities are going to be. Most of foreign assistance does that, and for good reasons. Long-term development has long-term development standards, and they can plan far in advance. We don't do that. We act as we move, and we invent and innovate as we go forward, and we learn from very small things. Look, to print those peace accords probably cost us, and I'm just guessing here because I don't know the number exactly, $50,000. And we learned a lot from that. And then we were able to, I think we actually ended up printing more of them because they were so successful. People wanted them so much. But the key difference between OTI and, say, humanitarian assistance or long-term development assistance is we're a contingency office, and we embrace that. We embrace the unknown. And that allows us to innovate as we go. Instead of plan in advance.
So in my mind, you are a government agency, right? You're part of USAID. There's bureaucracy involved. There's paperwork. What is it about the way that you're structured? What is it about the types of staff or mechanisms that you have available to you that allows you to be flexible and able to, let's just say there's a new crisis here in Bangkok where I'm sitting tomorrow. Like, what would enable you to move quickly and fast that other agencies or other organizations wouldn't be able to do?
So we do have notwithstanding authority, and that allows us to hire a cadre of staff that works here in Washington, taking a lot of the complex contractual requirements off of the people in the field. And then that allows the people in the field to be far more into the implementer's business. So we manipulate, and I say that in a positive way, we manipulate the implementer on a daily basis to do what the U.S. government needs to get done. So get back to what I already said about we don't determine in advance. We change and innovate as we go. So that's the first thing, that our staff are hired through a notwithstanding authority and are in particular can be available for that. So we can put more people on a project, on a problem set than other parts of the U.S. government. Secondly, we have designed over 23 years an implementing mechanism that is very adroit and adaptable for any context. And that's the thing that we manipulate. And then our management structure is such that we are super conscious about how we work with our implementing partner. We don't just sign a contract and give it to them. We work with them on a day-to-day basis. And lastly, the culture of OTI is enthusiastic about those 3 things I just mentioned. And any one of those 4 things taken away, and I think it would begin to crumble.
So it's not a table with 3 legs, it's a table with 4 legs, really.
Right. And one part of our operating model is that we are almost religious on this idea of one team, which has 4 corners. So you've got OTI in the field, our implementing partner in the field, and we couldn't do any of this without our implementing partners. And then, so that's in the field, and then you've got the same 2 corners here in Washington, and we make sure that those 4 corners are in constant communication so that everybody's on the same page as challenges come up, as objectives change. And changing in our objectives is one of the best things about OTI. We celebrate that. If you change your objective, that means you're getting better at what you're doing.
Can you give me a sense of how big OTI is right now? I mean, in terms of permanent staff, obviously you're flexible in terms of the contractors you can hire and the implementing partners, but I'm looking at, right now you're in Burma, Cameroon, Colombia, Honduras, Lebanon, Libya, Syria. I mean, you're all over the place. So, what's kind of the size and breadth of what OTI looks like?
It's upwards of 200 staff. It sort of fluctuates between 200 and 225. I think we have our slots. The amount of people we can hire is 225. But we're not there. We're upwards of 200. Many of those staff are here in D.C., and this is a critical thing, that we take the functions of much of foreign assistance and do it in D.C. instead of in the field, so that our staff in the field can pay attention to the program.
Give me an example of that. Like, what is the tangible example of being able to keep something in D.C.?
So all of the implementing partners who we work with have to voucher. If they spend money in the field, then they have to come back to the U.S. government and ask for that money to be paid to them. We do that in D.C. That's an enormous amount of work. Anytime that a contract is modified, we do that in D.C. Most of U.S. foreign assistance does that in the field at USAID missions. We have an inverse model to that. It's really helpful to us.
That's interesting because, you just said it's an enormous amount of work and it's inverse to what normally happens. How does that play to your favor? Is that just because you can then control the process, or is it just so that it keeps what's happening in the field nimble? Is that the whole point?
Yeah, it's basically removing the administrative burden from people in the field, thereby giving them a great deal more time to monitor and work with the implementing partner. So it usually in foreign assistance, the implementing partners, and for good reasons, and it works well for long-term development and for humanitarian assistance, but the U.S. government gives them money to do something that they want to do. In OTI, it's different. We are hiring somebody, we're acquiring their competence to set up a procurement platform that we change on a daily basis according to the needs of the contingency environment that we're in. So OTI deploys the same instrument in every context, but what we're doing is different in every context.
Yeah, I think that's what I'm trying to wrap my brain around. You said it, maybe about 3 minutes ago, and I missed writing it down, but that's your area of innovation where you're able to manipulate that process. Did I get that right?
Yeah, that's right. Absolutely.
So take me to your other favorites. Other favorites are obviously you put Mali on the table just a few seconds ago, but is there another go-to project that if we were sitting here having a beer that you like to tell people about this is something that's we went into Colombia, we went into Niger, we went into Pakistan, and we were able to accomplish this, and everyone was just kind of blown away.
Yeah, I've got plenty of them because I worked on OTI programs as an implementing partner before I joined OTI, so I knew it from that side too. So I've got a lot of great anecdotes, but the one that I'll focus on is Pakistan. In 2007, the State Department came to OTI and said, our troops, we're going to do a surge in Afghanistan. And that happened. And the ground line of communications, the GLOC that goes through Pakistan, through the FATA, the federally administered tribal areas, was blocked by the Taliban and other associated groups. And the State Department said, you need to, basically my instructions were drain the swamp. That's what they said. They didn't give me any other explanations. They just said, we need to clear this area so that our troops are served. And so OTI did it. We designed a process to work with the FATA Secretariat, which is the procurement arm of the Pakistani government that works in the FATA. And we basically restored government services throughout the FATA. When we began, the government of Pakistan controlled about, from my estimate, 10% of the FATA. And when we ended, we haven't even ended yet, but now they control 80%. Huge success. And we followed the Pakistani military as we did that. Working with a foreign military, that is innovative. I mean, I don't think we'd ever really done that before. From my perspective, it's the most successful counterinsurgency civilian operation ever. That's a bold statement, but I stand by that.
Can you give any more details? I have no idea what sort of security clearance I need for this conversation, but, are you able to provide a little bit more detail about, what is it that you were able to do that the Pakistani government couldn't do to get from 10% to 80%, operational? Was it warm bodies? Was it computers? Was it systems? Was it yelling a lot?
It was about 3,000 different small activities that brought back basic public services to the population in cooperation with the population. So we set up a lot of retaining walls and boreholes and removed a lot of rubble and restored markets and did a lot of small interventions. Each of them averaged about $45,000. And those are really important, but the more important part was how it got organized. The process is way more important than the product. And we did it through what's called community consensus jirgas, where we required the government, the population, and our implementing partner all to sit down and talk and argue and figure out what was needed in this particular community to help have the government extend its writ back to that community. And that process, regardless of the product, was way more important.
I wonder if you've answered my next question already through the jirga is what you called it. Because I was going to ask, so what is your process for innovation, right? So you're handed this task to stand up this process in the FATAs. I'm just wondering, how do you even decide on which areas, what to pursue and what projects not to pursue? You just said 3,000 small individual projects throughout these municipalities. Is the jirga, and convening community dialogue in that way, is that your innovative process that you take to every single place, or is that just Pakistan?
It's not every single place, but it is definitely a good practice, and we try to follow it when we can. It's not always appropriate. In Pakistan, because the government something had happened between the population and the government. It could have been the government's fault, it could have been the Taliban's fault, but the constituent relationship between the population and the government was broken, and we needed to restore that. So that's why we focused on these jirgas and then did projects through them. But that's not always how we do it.
And the people that you're putting on the ground there, again, I'm just trying to wrap my head around the possibilities here. You've got a maximum of 250 staff, 225 you said. What are the disciplines that these people are bringing to a place like Pakistan where, we could be talking water and sewage one day, but we could be talking, health services the next day, and we could be talking agricultural delivery the next day. Is everyone just a sort of a multidisciplinary generalist, or do you have sets of individuals who are specialists in each of these places, or?
Yeah, that's a great question. I've been asked that many times within the government, because the U.S. government is always trying to figure out how to plan for future contingency operations. And the way that I answer it is there's no specialists. These are special generalists. And it's a mindset in my staff of people who are comfortable with contingency and comfortable with not knowing exactly what needs to be done. And very, very, this is the most important point, very comfortable listening to the national staff, listening to what they say, because they're the experts. They're the ones that understand their country better than we do. And it's kind of uncomfortable for some people to get into that place where you admit that as a leader in a program that you don't know what to do. And you're constantly being asked within the U.S. government, what is the answer? How are you going to achieve this particular thing and prove that you're being successful? And you have to be able to say, look, we don't know yet. We got to get out there and learn as we go. Every one of the activities that OTI does then informs what the next activities are. And that's critical. As I already said, changing your objectives is usually the best idea. And listening to the national staff is the way to get into that.
Do you have before we go down that rabbit hole, because I do definitely want to talk a little bit more about listening, are there other mechanisms or approaches or practices that you look for in these special generalists or general specialists in order for them to be able to be able to look at problem solving? Is that something you teach, or is that a skill that you build, or is that you find it in the people and it's just a good fit within the culture that you have already?
Yeah, we definitely train on OTI practices. We have a very serious training regime, but one thing I haven't really mentioned is that once we get into a place and we see that, okay, we want to restore the constituent relationship between a population and a government, like in Pakistan. And then we decide, okay, we're going to be doing a lot of water projects. Then we hire water engineers. So we're able to do that very quickly, and we can hire them usually from the local population. So whatever specialty that we're going to end up working on, we hire for that. But that's after the process of dialogue with the population.
If you have a cadre of 200 people, essentially, that you can put out across, these 14, 15 countries that you're working in right now, and who knows what's going to happen tomorrow, right? Is there a process or a skill set that you provide them? And you said there's a training, very rigorous training. And it's an OTA mindset, it's an OTA tool set or skill set that you provide them. And I'm just wondering if we can crack that nut about what's included in there. Is it special problem-solving skills? Is it the way to look at a problem? Is it the way to engage in dialogue? Are there specific pieces you can tell us about that would help us to understand that?
Yeah, it's all of those, but in addition, it's OTI systems, because we have a lot of systems, including getting into our field staff's mind that they have to look at whatever the problem set is, that's within a larger context, and they need to do a contextual analysis. So we train our staff on how to do that, and we also try to hire folks. The thing that I look for most when I'm interviewing someone is where people say, I don't understand OTI. The people who come in and say, I know exactly what's going to be done in every context because of my background, those are the folks that usually are too stringent in their attitudes and can't be flexible when they get to the field.
I feel like your interview technique must be mostly a personality test. It's like, how comfortable are you with ambiguity? And then, whatever I'm going to throw at you, you kind of start to crack it open and solve the problem.
Yeah, I can't agree with that because we're the U.S. government and we can't do it by a personality test.
Oh, sorry. I didn't want to put you on the spot there. That was totally not a loaded question.
That's all right.
I can see you now with your Rorschach test. You're putting it in your drawer right now. I'm sure of it.
So we can't ask people questions like, do you walk up escalators?
That's fantastic. So do you play well with others? I guess you're in Pakistan. You're in, every country that is listed that you're working in right now, there are other development actors, there are other humanitarian actors. Obviously, there's a lot of local NGOs, there's a lot of local private businesses, these kinds of things. Is it your goal to be able to connect all of those actors and work with them? Or do you sometimes feel like, you kind of come in and shove other people out of the way for a while and say, look, we got to get this done? How does that work?
Shoving people out of the way is not a good idea. So we like to go in and we want the rest of the U.S. government interagency and all the foreign assistance community to understand that we are serious partners and we're not going to be pushing anybody out of the way. And then as we begin to do our work, that stands on its own and we get sort of a market share because we do a good job. So when OTI was first created, it used to go into countries and not tell the USAID mission that it was even there. And we don't do that. We play very well in the sandbox in the U.S. government interagency and spend a lot of time paying attention to that because if we don't have the right relationships, we're not going to be able to get our work done.
What's the biggest hurdle for the work that you do? Is it getting access to local actors? Is it playing in that interagency process? What are the things that give you the biggest headaches?
Biggest headaches? Well, this gets into the lack of understanding of our model by other parts of the government. And that's understandable. If they haven't really dealt with it, it should be expected that they don't understand it. But when they don't understand it, that's when they get into wanting the exact answers. And our model is predicated on we believe in our ignorance and we're going to innovate by listening to local actors. So that is really, that's our strength and our weakness. Our model is our biggest weakness because other people don't understand it.
So do you have a story of failure that you can tell us? One of the things that I love to ask is, falling on your face is usually the best way to learn, but at least it's been my experience over the last 15 years in development and aid, we're really terrible at talking about it. What about that?
So I won't give the particular because I don't want to embarrass anybody, but I'll describe it a bit obliquely. It's OTI fails when it begins to do long-term development. And when that becomes our objective, that's when we start to stumble and we begin to lose our edge. Not that long-term development is a bad thing. It's just we're bad at it.
Well, sure. And your model doesn't really support it very well. Or
exactly. At all. Yeah. So a couple of times, certainly in my tenure and before I joined OTI began to do long-term development programs because by some sort of accretion, the mission wants to push us into doing long-term development, or the people that we have on staff want to begin to do that. And then we begin to lose the objective of a contingency operation. So every time we've done that, we have stumbled and fallen on our face.
And you think that's, I mean, I can see it now, you get in and you do, let's just say like in Pakistan, you get in, you do a great job and you see huge results and people are like, hey, let's just do a little bit more of it. Let's do a little, and let's keep going. How do you know when to hand over, when to say, hey, you know what, it's our job here is done?
Yeah, that's a great question. We face that every day, it seems. So we used to have a rule that we were out within 2 years and we would then get out after 4 years. So we don't have a hard, fast rule. The Pakistan program is a great example. I think we've been there 12 years now. But OTI it's changed a lot, though. I mean, the program hasn't remained the same the whole time. So it's continued to evolve. But we need to get out of Pakistan. And so what we do is we have a negotiation with the mission and the embassy and work to get out. And it's harder to get out of a country than it is to get in a country, frankly.
I didn't even ask this at the beginning. How long have you been the director?
I'm looking at my chief of staff for the answer to that. I think 2 years.
2 years, okay.
I was acting for a year, and then I've been the director for 2 years, yeah.
But you've been with OTI longer than that?
I've been with OTI 10 years.
Okay, and before that you were with a partner that worked with OTI. This has been in your headspace for more than a decade. In this particular kind of work.
2 decades, more than 2 decades.
Okay, you don't have to dig your own grave here, but that's cool. In this particular kind of work, what has been the biggest disruption that you've seen? I mean, a typical answer on this particular show is, the advent of the mobile phone and, smartphones and these kinds of things. But I'm wondering if there's something different that has changed the way that you can operate and solve some of these problems. Are there one or two things that you can point to that said, you know what, that was really a pivotal moment when we had access to this?
Well, I hate to give a stock answer, but the internet has greatly improved our ability to communicate and to process information. So that is when I started in this, there wasn't an internet.
For all of the millennials listening right now, that was actually a thing at some point.
Yeah. One of the biggest challenges is the closing space around the world. The environment of conflict has changed from when I began working in this stuff, where it was very clear, two sides in a conflict. Now it's non-state actors who are causing the United States government to have to remotely manage programming. I would also add that associated with that is a hyper risk aversion, which is contrary to working in contingency environments. And so that's a growing challenge.
Can you give me an example of that? Like, I understand what hyper risk aversion is, but are there particular instances where we haven't gone in when we should have, in your opinion? Or I'm not sure if you can even speak to that.
So we did those 3,000 activities in the FATA, and no American citizens could go inside the FATA.
Okay, I understand, sure. So it's all third-party implemented and monitored.
Yep.
And then when you monitor, is it the typical sort of cadre of GPS locations, photographs, and that kind of evidence?
Yeah, time-stamped photos with GPS locations, which is really critical, but even that could be doctored. So what we do in a place like that is we triangulate our monitoring, have different groups monitoring the same projects. One of the innovative things we did in Pakistan and elsewhere is we set up anonymous hotlines. So, we've got a project going, and then a sign that the project says, if you see corruption or you have a problem or there's a difficulty, call this hotline and somebody's going to check on it. So we do that, and it works really, really well.
What other barriers? Are there other barriers to the way that you operate other than people not understanding your model? Or other organizations not understanding your model? Is there overreach? God, I wish that we could go do that. Or I guess I'm wondering, how is it that you get to choose your projects? Is it a phone call that you receive? There's a red phone on your desk? Or how does that whole thing decided?
Okay, that's a couple of questions. The way we determine where we're going to go is different every single time. Sometimes I wake up in the morning, I turn on CNN, and I know we're going to have a program somewhere because something dramatic has happened. Other times it's an ambassador that wants us in, or USAID mission director. And other times it's OTI people who believe we should have a program there, and we are the forcing function. But one barrier that's not as easily discernible is that the majority of the entities that work in foreign assistance as implementing partners for USAID and other donors are used to doing business a certain way. And so that is sometimes a challenge when we hire an implementing partner to do a program and they're not familiar with OTI. And that can sometimes be a barrier. Also, there's sometimes that penchant for hiring people who are country experts. Challenge with that is a country expert already has an opinion about what needs to be done. Mm-hmm. And that is anathema to a contingency environment. And so we face those challenges quite often. Really great people, super wonderful implementing partners, but sometimes don't understand how OTI is going to interact with them.
The question I want to ask is the typical type of person that works for OTI. You know, you read about people who are conflict junkies. You read about reporters who do reporting from conflict situations or these types of things. Do you find that pervades your culture as well in OTI, where it's you want to be in the field, you want to be a part of what's going on? You know, if you come home and you're stateside too long, you get a little jittery.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's a definite yes. I myself am like the poster boy of that.
If you don't smell jet fuel every so often, you start to get a little crazy.
Yeah, but I get to travel quite a bit, so that's helpful. But when I was courting my wife, we had a prenuptial agreement that we were going to live in D.C. for 4 years and then go abroad. We've been here 12 years, so it's a challenge.
Is there anything that OTI does or a process that you use that you think has become or has been adopted by other organizations? You've been successful in a number of places, and your process of not having a process, has been successful. Do other people adapt that? Do other people adopt it? Are they using, or do you train other people how to do it?
I just want to correct you. It's not that we don't have a process. We have there's an inherent struggle in OTI about how many standards do we need to have and how much total flexibility do we want to provide to the field. So we, as I mentioned earlier, we train on our systems, which is what allows us the flexibility to not discern in advance exactly what we're going to do. We are held up as a model within the government, and other parts that I was just speaking recently with leadership in USAID, and they said we want more of the parts of USAID to take on the model that OTI uses in managing our implementing partners. So we're trying to help them do that. So they're trying frequently to learn from OTI, which is great. And that doesn't put us on a pedestal. That OTI works in a different space than much of the rest of the USAID. And I don't know if our methods are totally appropriate for other parts of USAID. But they are trying to learn from us as we go, and we need to learn from them as well.
Is there anything that you've brought into your processes, where you came in or you worked with an implementing partner or another development actor or humanitarian actor, and you said, wow, that you can remember, that you're like, let's adopt that?
I think this is kind of wonky, but we have a really, really great database. It's fantastic. And we developed that in league with our partners. We didn't develop that on our own.
Is it a database for staff, for like a bullpen?
It's for the management of our small grants process. So it's the management of our implementing partner. We developed that in tandem with our partners. I think that OTI, one thing that I try to demonstrate to our staff is that we need to have an open dialogue with our partners all the time. If we become the client, if we just become the donor, and they're the implementing partner, and there's this otherness to it, it begins to break down. And so I try to inculcate that within OTI. And our partners have learned that, and I think are trying to push back when OTI becomes too doctrinaire, when OTI people just become a hierarchical manager. And hierarchy is the graveyard of innovation, in my belief.
Some of the programs that you described, they could be fantastically expensive, right? 12 years in Pakistan is not for the sleight of heart. Obviously, you're a U.S. government agency, you're a line item in the budget somewhere, but do you have flexible spending? Do you have to go out and raise funds? Like, where's the beginning and the end of how you can think about money? Or do you have to go, as long as you can go raise it, you can spend it?
Yeah, so OTI's funding is a bit complicated. So first of all, we have transition initiatives money, and that's an account that only OTI has. And that has, over the years, gone up. And it's gone up 37% in the most recent budget request. But the majority of the money that we spend is after OTI begins a program and the mission or the embassy or a foreign government really believes that that program is doing a good job, they fund it. They give us the money. I think in 2015, 4/5 of our money came from other sources.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So we go in and we do it. Our model works. It does a really good job and it achieves results very fast. We've got a great reporting system through our database. And then the mission will say, gosh, this is really great. We want you guys to keep doing it. And they give us money.
Is that, the people on the ground, they're the ones who are receptive to that? Or I guess it's not an active petitioning for funds, right? Basically, they're focused on doing the work. And if it so happens that the money, other money comes in, or is that an active process?
No, I mean, we don't go tin cup in hand and ask for money from people, but we say, look, our program's going to end unless money is found for it. And there's frequently enough money in the system that we get funding. If the funding is not there, we stop the program. Or since we do have transition initiatives money, we may fund it ourselves. It's a constant calculus that's ever changing.
So you've been the director now for 2 years. What's the next 3 or 4 years look like for you? Are there particular ways you see or you envision continuing to shape the organization to be a more efficient, more effective machine? Or, how are you leading in a different direction?
So first thing I need to do is get this new administration to understand OTI. And that is going to be a process for the next year, I would say, maybe it'll be longer. We then are constantly trying to evolve within OTI, and that has to go forward. Because we have a new administration, there's a lot of opportunity in redesigning the government, and I'm going to play a role in that as the OTI director. And we'll see how USAID restructures itself, if it does. But the redesign process is something that I'm going to definitely be a participant in.
The last 2 questions I have are 2 questions I ask for every guest on the show. The first one is, who do you pay attention to in terms of, how to stay fresh, how to, see what's new out there, sort of just learn about new ideas? Are there magazines you read, Twitter feeds you follow, blog posts you read?
I read Plutarch, and I read Shakespeare, and I'm not joking. That's what I do. And I get a lot of ideas from learning from the ancients. And I'm not being facetious. I'm serious about it.
I believe you. I'm lucky to have known you for a long time, so I know that that's the truth. The last question that I ask everyone here is there something outside of OTI, something outside of, your normal everyday practice and innovation, a process, a shiny new object, a thing that floats, without anybody knowing how it floats, that you think deserves a shout out that isn't getting the press that it needs?
So we have not figured out in OTI how to deal with big data. There's got to be a way for us to learn from that and push our programming, and we just haven't figured it out yet. We've many times gone through various instruments and touched big data, but I can't remember any decision we made because of it, and I don't know why that is, so we need to figure that out. That also, we have a challenge with talking about our countering violent extremism work. We have a plausible certainty that what we're doing is making a difference, but we can't quantify it. And I'm not sure if we ever will be able to. And maybe by analyzing big data, we will get at the perceptions and attitudes of populations, which is the most important thing when you're really trying to counter violent extremism. So we're struggling with that.
Stephen, I know your time is precious. Thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show today. This has been a fantastic conversation.
Thank you very, very much.
Hey guys, if you found value in this conversation with Stephen Lennon and other people like him who are really the Aidpreneurs out there making a difference, would you mind sharing it with others? Throw it up on Facebook, throw it in your Twitter feed, share it on Snapchat, whatever it is, and give us a like. iTunes or whatever podcast player you happen to have, just, hit the like button or give us a review. It's really, really helpful. And of course, if you have any questions or comments, hit me up at aidpreneur.com or just go to the blog post that's associated with this podcast and leave us a comment. Thanks. You've been listening to the Terms of Reference podcast from aidpreneur.com. Subscribe to us on iTunes.